So we've all seen the headlines, right? Thousands of canceled flights, total chaos at the airports. But what really went down at IndiGo? In this explainer, we're going to go way past the surface level drama to get to the real core of this crisis.
I mean, it felt like this problem just exploded overnight. Suddenly, there's this massive wave of cancellations hitting travelers, terminals are completely packed, and passengers are just, well, stranded. But this chaos, it didn't just come from nowhere.
And the scale here is just staggering. This wasn't some minor hiccup or a technical glitch. We're talking about millions of people, millions of journeys just completely thrown into chaos. And that, you can imagine, created a huge wave of frustration. So, this is the big question on everyone's mind, isn't it? Is the airline in some kind of deep financial trouble? Was this just a really, really bad string of luck? Let's break it all down and find out what's really going on behind the scenes.
Okay, so the first and most important thing to get is this. This was not a financial crisis. IndiGo wasn't running out of money, not even close. This was a crisis of management, a completely self-inflicted operational meltdown. Let's take a look at how it all went so wrong. This timeline really shows you just how fast everything fell apart. It all started on November 1st when new, stricter rules for pilot rest kicked in. But within a few weeks, by early December, IndiGo's entire schedule was collapsing because they just didn't have enough crew to staff their flights. India's aviation regulator, the DGCA, they came down hard and fast, first with warnings, then by putting a team right inside IndiGo's headquarters, and finally, they just ordered the airline to slash its flight schedule. And all of this leads to a really critical question. Was this just massive, unbelievable incompetence? Or was there something more strategic, maybe even a little cynical, going on here? So you've got two main theories. On one side, you have this simple explanation, operational negligence, a huge failure to plan for a rule change that, by the way, everybody knew was coming. But then there's this other, more cynical theory, that this was a strategic ploy, that they created all this chaos on purpose to try and force the government's hand to get them to relax the new rules.
Now, that strategic ploy theory is dramatic, for sure. But honestly, the evidence we have points pretty strongly to just good old-fashioned negligence. For one, management themselves admitted to a miscalculation. They've even brought in outside experts to figure out what went wrong, which is not something you do if this was all part of some secret plan. And maybe most importantly, the regulator didn't blink. They cracked down harder, which means if this was an attempt at pressure, it backfired spectacularly.
Now, to be fair, this idea of a strategic ploy doesn't come from absolutely nowhere. As commentators like Sucheta Dalal have pointed out, using public disruption as leverage against regulators, well, it's a tactic that has been seen before in this industry. But in this specific case, the regulator's firm response really suggests that if it was a ploy, it was a really bad one. The much more likely answer seems to be a severe planning failure.
With all this chaos, it's totally natural to wonder if the company itself is in financial trouble. I mean, can it even survive something like this? Well, the numbers, they tell a very, very clear story.
So let's just address the elephant in the room. With all these canceled flights and refunds and angry customers, could this crisis actually put the airline out of business?
The answer is a resounding no. And why? Because of this number. The airline is sitting on a massive cash pile of over 53,000 crore rupees. That is an enormous financial cushion. I mean, more than enough to absorb the shock from this entire crisis.
And you know, it wasn't just the cash. Before this whole self-inflicted wound, the airline was in fantastic financial shape. Across the board, very low debt, they were pulling in record profits, and they had strong ratings. The bottom line is this: IndiGo has the money to fix this mess. The real question is whether it has the competence. Okay, so if bankruptcy is off the table, what does the future actually hold for IndiGo? Let's look at three pretty realistic scenarios for what could happen from here.
All right. The most likely path is what we'll call the base case. They basically take their lumps, fix the scheduling problems with the regulator watching over their shoulder, and eventually they recover. Then there's a more painful route, the adverse case. This is where the conflict with the regulator drags on, customers start to lose faith, and their market share begins to slip. And finally, you have the worst case. It's unlikely, but it's where severe penalties just cause a major financial collapse, stopping just short of actual bankruptcy.
And you can see right here what those scenarios mean for the bottom line.
In that base case, yeah, profits take a hit, but they're still healthy. But look what happens in the other scenarios. That profit can just evaporate incredibly quickly. The path they choose from here has massive, massive financial consequences.
So,
After looking at the cause, the finances, and the potential future, what's the single biggest takeaway from this entire mess? What does it all mean for us?
It all comes down to this term, operational governance. It sounds a bit corporate, but it's simple. It's about the basic, fundamental competence of running your business. For an airline, scheduling your crew is one of the most core functions there is. And this crisis has exposed a massive failure right at the very heart of IndiGo's operations. So, as this whole situation unfolds, here are the key things you're going to want to watch for. First, what does the regulator's final report say, and what are the actual penalties? Second, we need to see a clear public plan from IndiGo on how they're fixing their systems. Next, we'll see the real impact in their quarterly financial results. And finally, and this might be the most important one, will the current management team keep their credibility and trust?
And that brings us to the final lingering question, doesn't it? We know IndiGo has the financial strength, the cash, to survive this operational blunder, but the real issue is one of trust. Has the airline proven that it has the core competence, the governance, to be trusted to fly reliably? That's the question that management, regulators, and millions of passengers are now going to have to answer.